Welcome to the Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. First up in this episode, part 2 of my interview with Canadian e-commerce leader Tanbir Grover. We continue our conversation talking about digital marketing, the reality of ROAS and transcending metrics, team building, and the strategy of understanding the essence of a minimal viable product. And Tanbir breaks big career news. Next, from Tanbir 2.0 to Cannabis 2.0, Andy Palalas joins me again from HighTide and Canna Cabana to bring us up to speed on Cannabis 2.0, the importance to the retail trade of these new products, customer feedback, merchandising strategies, and the year ahead for HighTide. But first, let's listen into my conversation with Tanbir, picking up where we left off last episode talking about the modern attribution riddle. Let's talk about complexity. I'll pick up on that word, and let's talk about figuring out accountability for what you're spending. I'm pivoting a bit, but accountability for what you're spending in terms of driving business and figuring out the attribution riddle. You and I have talked about it before. Man. And I was kind of hoping...
favorite topic sometimes.
Well, I was kind of hoping that you'd have, I figured it out, and then I'd have this breakthrough podcast, but I think that's a lot to burden any of us with. But talk about your thoughts about attribution. And
We've my mentality is we struggle with it, for sure. And one of the early coachings I got from my boss at the Bay, who said to me, if you think about you wanting a seat at an executive table, you're not going to get a seat at the table by showing clicks or impressions. You're going to get a seat by showing sales.
Right.
So when I joined Lowe's, that always stuck with my mind and said, you know what, I'm going to focus on driving online sales. And I'm going to really zero in on ROAS and make that sort of the area we look at. And that worked for us, especially in the beginning.
And for the listeners, ROAS, return on ad spend. So when you invest in Google or whatever, you kind of...
You have sort of
you can calculate
for every dollar you put into
that.
Google, I'm making X dollars in sales per se.
You think
based on what Google and other providers like Flip and the display guys are providing you with data on. But the challenge is really it's your best metric. At the end of the day, that's all you've really got, because if you start delineating down, you can start talking about how many store visits am I driving. And I'll give you a great example in what I think about when I think about store visits that Google will share is, Tanbir goes to the store, he looks online, he sees something, and he buys something in the store. But what they don't also know is my wife, who lives in the same household as me, looks at that same thing online. We both look at it together. We both go to the store together, and then we make only one purchase. So it's one household purchase, even though there may be 2 or 3 times we've done something as a family unit. So there's still some nuances that we got to figure out in that data set, because there's
householding has always been a challenge.
3 store visits that could have happened because or 2 store visits that happened, me, my wife and I, but there's only one conversion per se. But that's, to your point, is household is still a big topic, but especially in home improvement where it's not individual fashion per se that you're buying pieces. But when you think about it, the evolution also is, okay, so we got from focusing on online sales to how many store visits am I driving? Because that became the big push. And everybody wants that. And I totally get it, and I understand, that's where a majority of our sales are still occurring, is in a brick and mortar business. I think where we have to figure out is how do we as a business prioritize what we want to go after? And how do we actually budget for those priorities? And in terms, change the metrics around. So, for example, if I'm looking at paint as a category, then maybe you don't measure me on return on ad spend because there's no value for me to do paint, but you measure me on clicks or impressions. But when it comes to like barbecues or snow blowers, you measure me on return on ad spend, and you fund me in order to get that delivery of current ad spend that continues. And you kind of tier those metrics back and forth, right? So you kind of say, in this category, priority is return on ad spend for online. In this category, the return on ad spend is driving clicks to a store. And I think if you start changing the KPIs and the way you incentivize the marketing groups, then the attribution becomes less important. It becomes more about what do you value as an organization and what do you want to see as a return of that evaluation. And I think once you kind of get around as an organization together with all the right marketers and put them all together and say, this is what we're trying to do, that doesn't just change your digital marketing component. It should change your entire marketing component, because then you should look at your flyer differently. And you should look at your radio differently, and you should look at your TV differently, because all of these things should also be measured the same way you're measuring digital, and they should be attributed in the same concept of the way you measure digital. So that's kind of the way I've thought about it, but it's unfortunate because I don't think in the years I've been doing this, I've ever come to the conclusion where I can say this is driving this, other than really leaning in on the U.S. side and saying, you guys tell us what you're finding, because you guys have at least some level of micro data where you got credit card, you know the customer through Milo's programs, so you can kind of come do this assessment and say, if a customer is spending this online, this is what we see them spending in store and vice versa.
And directionally, this is the way it's going to go. Last question for you. Let's talk about teams and your approach to building the team. You're a great team builder, great leader within your team, and how you manage the team in terms of running the business. And you know, the kind of two schools of thought, I'm going to do successive iterations, multiple iterations, versus I'm going to do bigger releases that, you know, achieve a broader strategy. They all work up to a broader strategy, but how do you approach those kind of two things?
So I think, you know, I've always been, I guess, look at sports as sort of as a North Star for me of how do you think about motivation in teams and how do you think about getting teams aligned. And there's one sport which nobody ever talks about, which I think is the greatest sport from a team perspective, which is dragon boating. And why I say that is I started dragon boating really early in my career. Sort of my first job at Bombardier, that year I started dragon boating. And it resonated with me forever is because, you know, you could be the strongest, biggest guy on that boat. And the whole idea of that boat is that guy can only move the boat so little. Because if the person in front of him is slower and the person behind him is slower, those paddles are going to start whacking each other. And all of a sudden you're not in sync. And when you're not in sync, the boat's going to turn in circles. And that was kind of a really an interesting sort of analogy for me, which was, you know, it's not about being the biggest, strongest guy in the boat. It's about understanding the guy in front of you and behind you and actually augmenting yourself to play with that flow and to understand that flow. Because if you understood the flow, you were going to be great. So when I thought about it from a digital perspective, that's what's happening in our space today. Is not everybody is a digital expert that comes into the team. And what we try to hire for in terms of culture is we try to hire a lot for curiosity. We try to hire a lot for, I want to dig deeper and try to understand why this happens and ask themselves, how do you do this? Why do you do it this way? And kind of continuously challenge that concept. I think the other thing that we always want, especially in this industry, is we also tend to get a lot of younger people who are kind of not necessarily afraid of risk or open to wanting to try new things, especially in the digital age. So you get people who want to make an impact. So that's kind of also what I want, is people who want to come into this business and make an impact. Because in digital, you can make that impact pretty quickly.
Right.
And then the last thing that I kind of say, and Simon taught me that from Staples, was you want to allow people to try stuff without the fear of retribution. You don't want people to, you want to fail fast, which I think is an overused term. I think the better term is you want to learn from your mistakes. Just that easy, right? So you don't want to make the same mistake twice, which is common. Is how I was raised by my dad and mom, which was like, you can make a mistake once, no problem. Make it twice, then there's something going on that you're not understanding that we want to work on. And I think taking that and making that a priority for our team was a big thing, because, a lot of people will say, I tried this and it didn't work. And you're kind of like, kudos for you for trying, versus just kind of doing whatever is the normal sort of practice.
Sure. The safe route.
The safe route and happy route type of thing. So I think all of those things mixed in kind of provide the baseline of what I would call we want as a digital culture. I think the next part of that all is, I also want people to learn. Like, I think people come in and they that's why, the stuff that you guys do, the stuff you've done with the RCC is really vital and important, because you get one perspective when you work for a single company, or you learn one way of doing it in e-commerce. But when you start melding and networking, you start getting new ideas. It starts bringing fresh thought to the table. You bring it all back, and at the end of the day, that becomes part of your DNA and part of your stuff of, hey, I want to try something. This is, this guy's trying it, or this group is trying it. I can kind of hear it.
Maybe good for us, maybe not, but let's give it a try. Someone seems to be working for them, or it may not be working for them, but let's,
But it provides
it's
thought,
cross-pollinization.
Right? And exactly, right? So a lot of this stuff is, is the encouragement of, like, go out and learn. Like, go out to e-tail, go out to RCC events, go out to different things, go meet with vendors. Like, for you and I both, when we first started in e-com, I can guarantee we were learning still, and we continue to learn.
Sure.
But guess who a great infusion of knowledge for us was? Vendors.
That's right.
Right? I mean, Google basically taught me how to do digital marketing because I just wasn't aware of all the things. And they would come in and present, and I would ask them questions. I'd go back, I'd read some stuff, I'd go, this is great. So even the vendor community kind of provides all this learning and development that you kind of go. So when I think about creating that culture for a team, it starts with creating that baseline of what do you want as a leader and what do you expect out of your people as a leader. then it's the regular business stuff of holding people accountable, trying to drive results through that, making sure people feel rewarded and, are given given the time to share their accolades, given their ability to get promoted and moved around are all part of it.
Yeah.
And then, what's been interesting for me as I've taken on more of the technology side of it is just seeing how the agile methodology also has to play in, right? As we kind of, to your point is, do you want to wait for this big impact type stuff? In the old days, I'd say, yeah, maybe I did. Now I'm more like, okay, how fast can I get stuff out just to get it into the market? And a great analogy that was shared with me that stuck with me is the whole theory of what's the minimal viable product. So the MVP.
Yep.
And you don't have to look far, but if you look at humanity and you look at a newborn baby, a newborn baby is in theory a minimum viable product.
Sure.
Right? It can breathe, but it can't see. It can't eat. It needs all of this care and attention and all those things, but all it can do is breathe at this point in time, right? And that's what we consider minimal viable. And I think as brands and as businesses, we have to reestablish what that minimal viable really looks like, because sometimes we extend it to be too much,
right?
And I think that's the challenge of is it ready for the customer? Well, it is, but do you want to start there, or do you want to start with your associates first? Do you want to start with something smaller where you can do it in a beta group and try to do that and get your own get your own teams to kind of play with it before you're ready to go?
Right.
So when I think about that agile culture and some of the things that are in there, it's about speed, but it's also about collaboration. It's about trust, because in an agile world, there's a lot of trust between the product owner and the IT groups that are happening.
Yeah, it is not. In other words, I don't want to put these words in your mouth, but it's not move fast and break things.
No,
right?
Not at all. Right? It's move fast, but collectively, and not try to break things, but try to make things. So be more positive about it. Right? So try to make something happen, and if something breaks as a consequence of trying to make it, so be it. But the energy that you're putting in is to make something happen, right? And it's not to get it done either, right? It's to make something that you want to happen, is the way I would frame it.
So you've got a new transition in your career coming up. This podcast will be after
I leave, I hope.
Yeah. Will be after you leave. Yeah, this will be in a couple of weeks, and you may not want to talk about it. But,
no, that's fine. I'm happy to. Yeah.
So you've got a transition coming up in your career, many great years at Lowe's, but you've decided to take a new challenge and a new risk in your career. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I'm very excited. I'm excited and I'm sad. I think it's hard to describe the emotion. I'm excited because I'm actually going to be joining the Cooperators Group as their new VP of Digital.
Congratulations.
So thank you. I'm excited only in that it's a different industry after being in retail for 12 years and exclusively on the e-com side.
Sure.
I feel like what a great opportunity to broaden my skill set. Just learn things differently and kind of go back to what I really have enjoyed, which is the startup side of the culture. Now, as we talked about earlier, e-com is pretty established here, but I think there's still a lot of opportunity on the FI and insurance businesses to kind of get that going. But I am also sad. I mean, I'm sad because I feel like I'm leaving a great group of people behind at Lowe's who have made some, who've been part of my career and have been part of the success I've had in my career at Lowe's. But at the same time, I'm also, sad because I think it's a big change in terms of what I'm doing in my own career. For me, Lowe's personally was where I got married. When I first joined, I had both my kids while I was working at Lowe's.
Lots of milestones, right?
So a lot of those personal personal milestones happen. It's a place I've worked the longest in my career too. So I'm kind of sad by it.
12 years, that's a good run, man.
7.5.
Oh, sorry, 7.5.
Yeah,
7.5 years. That's a good run.
So it's a great run. In digital, for me, it's a great run. And you go back to 2016 when we acquired Rona. That was a big opportunity to kind of learn the cultural piece of it, not just get caught up in in just managing a business, but actually appreciating what it meant for two companies to come together and how that would work. But I'm excited about what the future holds in retail too. I think as we talked earlier today, there's a lot of stuff that happens in retail that's quick and it's fast. A lot of testing and learning, and where I see the biggest opportunities, what we talked about is how do we connect the physical and digital formats so they're just one format. How do we change the vernacular in our language instead of being like it's digital marketing and traditional marketing to it's just marketing. We haven't done that yet, and I'm kind of excited to see that next phase happen in our business as we go into the next decade. That's where I see the changes happening, and we don't have to look far. I just have to look at my kids and look at my kids and see how they interact with stuff, And you can see the changes on the horizon.
Digital natives, digital first,
that's what they're growing up with. Like my 2-year-old is going to the TV and thinking it's an iPad by swiping it and thinking this is what she can do. And you're kind of like...
Put a rotary phone in front of her.
Yeah, like what's she going to do with this type of stuff, right? And, it's interesting to see even as my 2-year-old grabs my phone to take photos of things, she's growing up in this world where everything is so connected and everything is so shareable. And, that's the challenge that I think we're going to have is how do we limit? Can you imagine saying this? That we're going to limit the digital capabilities we give our children.
Yeah, I could see it. I could see it for
sure. We're on the flip side of it. We're at the point right now where we're trying to explode the digital capabilities we can give our customer base. Yeah. Right? We're trying to say, let's do as much as we can. Let's try to give you as much control as you can from your mobile phone, because that didn't exist for our parents. That didn't exist for us even until like 2007.
It's true.
Right? True. So, even the BlackBerry, when it first came out, it was cool. It was like trendy, right? But it wasn't. It was meant for the business guy. That's how I always remembered. Is if you were a business guy, you got a BlackBerry. But now today, you don't need to be anybody. Yeah. You're getting that's just the third arm of your existence. Is like you are. It's an extension of you.
Well, on behalf of the industry, if I can say it, we're sad to lose you, at least in the industry. Such a great career and great accomplishments, but excited for you at the same time. For 2020 and beyond. The insurance, the cooperators are a fortunate company to have some of your skills.
Thank you so much, Michael. Yeah.
So thank you so much for spending time here with me on The Voice of Retail. It was a real treat chatting with you.
I think you do a fantastic job. And, as we talked about, I'm proud of the work you've done. And
thank you.
And, I think for everybody that's a part of this retail industry, you're pivotal to sharing best practices and helping us along in terms of just thinking differently as we go through. So thank you for that too.
Well, we'll touch base maybe in 2020 and see your reflections on a different industry and what your insights are. Looking back as a customer
for sure
in 2020.
I would love to do that. That'd be great. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Andy, welcome back to The Voice of Retail. How are you doing?
Michael, I'm good. Nice to be on again.
Well, it's it's fantastic to have you on, such a leader in the industry, and when we first chatted, you were both we did an interview with the podcast, and you were on one of my panels. So for listeners that may not have had the opportunity to hear that episode yet, could you catch us up a little bit about your background and what you do with HighTide?
Yeah, for sure. So, Michael, I'm the revenue officer at HighTide. We're, first and foremost, a major Canadian retailer of cannabis. We're Canna Cabana is our brand that you'll see in Alberta and Saskatchewan and Ontario right now. We're also a distributor and manufacturer of smoking accessories. So we produce lines of products for folks to enjoy cannabis with in partnership with Snoop Dogg and Trailer Park Boys and Cheech and Chong and all sorts of other fun brands. So we've been around the cannabis space for a good long while and started as a bong shop in 2009. And today we enjoy a pretty interesting position in the Canadian market. And we're pretty excited about what 2020's got coming for us as cannabis retailers.
Well, fantastic. I think I saw some great news with a raise that HighTide did recently as well. $10 million, I think.
Yeah.
Went into the coffers.
That's true. Yeah.
Fantastic.
That was a credit facility, $10 million credit facility, which, we'll be using to expand in Ontario. Of course, the conversation about opening new stores in Ontario in 2020 is lively and happening right now. And so, we're optimistic that we'll be at the full cap by the end of the year. And this is a big step for us in order to make that happen.
Well, it's great to have the momentum back, particularly in Ontario.
2019 was a great year, Michael. Lots of learning.
Right. Lots of learning. 2020 will be the year of the growth year. That'll be exciting.
Sure.
Let's talk about 2020. I mean, one of the things I want to talk about particularly is on the retail cannabis side, Cannabis 2.0. So question about how important the Cannabis 2.0 products, the range of products that are now legal and now available to retailers or soon to be available to retailers are, and how important are they to cannabis retailers?
Oh boy. That's a big question, Michael. I think that you mentioned 2019 and I mentioned 2019 as a learning year. And I think one of the things we learned are many of the ways that, in Canada's first year of legalization, we've had incremental successes at winning customers and seeing what they've enjoyed about, for example, the Canna Cabana experience and the legal cannabis experience, which there's a lot there that actually isn't seeing a lot of airtime right now. So, we're proud of the work that's been done in the first year on all fronts. And by all accounts, 2020 should be a great refinement of some of those early wins. But Cannabis 2.0 is what we've all been waiting for. The reason I say that is we know, and at least internally at Canna Cabana, our opinion is that 2020 is the year where we do everything we can to appeal to today's black market consumer. And we know that the vast majority of cannabis being sold in Canada today is being sold in the black market still. So all of those dollars are still living in the non-legal channel. And so when we talk about edibles and we talk more specifically about concentrates and vape pens, these are products that are, they're not a nice addition. They're a core fundamental product in the cannabis space that's become popular in the United States over the last half a decade, to the point where it's now again a staple. And then in Canada, you can't go to a black market dispensary without, a wide assortment of concentrates, edibles, vape pens, 510 cartridges, you name it, right? So as we get more and more caught up on the products that customers are looking for, of course, the objective that we have, which is making those black market consumers comfortable and excited to shop with us, we get closer and closer to that goal.
So that enhanced assortment isn't just more assortment. It's pretty critical to the merchandising strategy by the sounds of it.
It's not a nice to have, to put it lightly. Yeah, right. No, it's not a nice to have. Even as long as we've been in the space, we've seen, for example, a transition from bongs to dab rigs. So for those that have never used one or don't know what that is, 10 years ago, we were selling a lot of glass water pipes for use with dried herb. Right? These are folks who are consuming cannabis in the dried flower format in a water pipe. And that was what we started this business on. In the last 5 years, our sales have shifted to really be 50-50 between glass water pipes, bongs that are meant for consumption of flower, to another 50%, the other 50% today, which is to be used with concentrates like shatters and waxes, et cetera. So, the core cannabis consumer who's been smoking for the last decade or longer, certainly longer in many cases, in the last 5 years has really transitioned, many of them, to either sometimes or all the time consuming concentrates. And it's just not something that we've, been able to service in Canada. So, it's right. a big chunk of the consumer preference that we've not been able to address.
So let's pick up on that thread a little bit. What do you expect to be the top sellers? There's a wide range of products. Obviously, concentrates like shatter and wax, based on what you just said, are going to be popular. What do you think about the other products, from beverages to chocolates to other things? What do you expect to be your top sellers? Vape pens, I suspect, would be probably close to the top. Give me what's your sense of what you expect to see based on experience, and I guess looking at the U.S. market and your notions yourselves as great merchants. Yeah,
well, I mean, vape, you hit the nail on the head. I think vape will continue to be number one up here in Canada, as it is in the United States. Well, I should say it's not number one in the United States, but for product categories outside of flower, for sure it is. Vape comes in two formats, really. You've got 510 cartridges and disposable pens are really the two predominant categories in the vape category. And the disposable cartridge vapes are oftentimes more appealing to either tourist consumers, or in the case of a few notable brands like Dosist, have additional built-in technology or mechanisms that allow folks to, for example, measure dose and manage dose. Whereas the 510 cartridges that are available on the market are the distillations and concentrations of popular cannabis strains that are every bit as craft as the dried flower that they're pressed from, and those are to be used on individuals' own devices. So I think both of those products serve a different need, but for sure they'll be the most important to our assortment moving forward.
What about beverages? There's lots of excitement around beverages. I think part of that is the ownership structure of some of the major LPs. They seem to be a fairly small percentage of the business in the U.S. Do you think will mirror this? I mean, it's early days, a little unfair for me to be asking in some ways. Any sense of what role they play? Could they play a bigger role?
Yeah, I think so. I'm confident they will. How long that'll take, I have no idea, Michael. We're not so focused on beverage right now. I believe it'll take some time for it to ramp up. Now, I could be totally wrong about that. The summer could land. You know, we could have tabletop fridges that folks are going bananas for, and everyone, you know, this summer, instead of drinking White Claw, might be out on the front porch popping a canopy beverage, right? I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. But, you know, my suspicion is right now the folks who are going in to pick up beverage are going to be the same folks, or it will serve a similar need to folks who are going in to buy edibles. And the challenge with edibles right now is that for an experienced black market consumer, of course, the legal cap is 10 milligrams of THC on any packaged good, right? So, you know, that limit is going to create some challenges for folks who are today's current cannabis consumer. They're used to buying 200 milligram or 300 milligram, you know, products. With beverage, it's going to be, so that will be the hurdle. I know that there's some producers that are producing 10 milligram beverages. But even still, you know, you need to get 2, 3, 4 beverages deep on that product to for these folks who are very experienced THC users to feel the effect.
I guess it's like a different market segment that it's going to address. I mean, the government has been very clear on the, you know, stay low, go slow approach to edibles. Clearly, with the 10 milligram limit, they're putting a cautious foot forward. So I guess it feels like it's kind of curious plus newbies, because as you say, the experienced user may find it a bit short of what.
You're entirely right. And to be clear, I believe that edibles and beverages are going to be an entry point into cannabis products for many of the new Canna Curious. I think it's really the only entry point. So how many Canadians legal cannabis can convert to cannabis users, either occasional or otherwise, I think will be fought and won based on edibles and drinks, and to a lesser extent, vape products. Like when I think of the new cannabis consumer, I often think of my mother. She never touched cannabis, not her thing. But could I get her to smoke a joint or light up a bong? Almost certainly no. Could I get her to try a vape pen?
Right.
Probably at some point. Yeah, we could probably get there. Could I get her to have a brownie? Depending on how hungry she is, you know, there's a good chance.
Or if they taste good, because that's
we've been doing some taste tests internally on the new edibles.
And what do you think? It's flavor there? Is the flavor profile good?
So that's one thing I'll say about legal edibles. I've had a lot of edibles over time, and some are better than others, certainly. But it seems like professional kitchens and competencies from folks who make jellies and chocolates for a living has really paid off, because you can scarcely taste anything other than those candy ingredients, and they're quite delicious.
Well, it's interesting as the professionals get into that market, whether it's a tasty beverage or other product, and maybe that's where they're going to win on the taste profile and the enjoyable of the beverage themselves. Let's pivot from that to training. I just want to touch on that for a little bit. We know how important the frontline staff is in your stores, wonderful frontline staff in your Canna Cabana stores across Ontario, and certainly in Toronto and Hamilton, I believe. Toronto, I've been in, Hamilton not. But what kind of incremental training have you taken on for Cannabis 2.0? It's a pretty big lift, yeah, from a lot of product, a lot of interesting stuff. Tell me a little bit about the training you've undertaken.
Well, I mean, honestly, Michael, it's been a bit rushed. I won't lie. Right. From the perspective of licensed producers, we started really seeing presentations on their new products in, I would say, mid to late November. So there's been a very condensed window of time for us to start digesting which products licensed producers are bringing to market, and, more specifically, which ones they're bringing to market right now, because we saw a lot of presentations for products, but many aren't coming out until the spring, right? Or later. So, and several have been delayed, right. Of course, in Alberta, where many of our stores are. Vape has been delayed. Some are speculating into the spring and perhaps even beyond that. So, yeah, I mean, it's been certainly something to sort through and figure out the best way to download this information to our store staff. The good news is our store staff comes, many of them, from a cannabis background or from a background with a deep personal connection with cannabis. So edibles and vape, internally are not a super new concept to most of these folks, right? That being said, a lot of our training materials have either come directly from licensed producers or directly from Health Canada. Health Canada has actually been pretty helpful in terms of putting together, not just a summary of their guidelines, but recommendations and some insights into, how these products might be sold or might be positioned, in store. Because of course, there's lots we can say, but an equal amount that we cannot, right? So I would say that the lion's share of, our training has been on, of course, product function, but also on making sure that our staff know what they can and can't say on the floor. Because there's a lot of questions, especially with those newbies coming in and they're excited about edibles, that we have to be careful how we address.
Last question, since we're very, very early days here, but I know you've got stores in a couple of 3 provinces now, and I wondered if you've had any early experience with sell in or sell through with any of the products. Basically, have you seen the products on your shelves, and what's been your very early experience?
For sure. Saskatchewan's been a really interesting run. So we received 2.0 product in Sask at our Swift Current location in December, I want to say 22nd or 21st. It goes without saying the product sold through very quickly. But we're pretty confident that our initial perspectives on edibles being somewhere between that 5 and 10% of overall sales, and vape being somewhere in the neighborhood of the 20 to 25% mark is pretty close to on the money. Now, as more and more users adopt vape, I think personally that it'll creep higher to 35% of overall sales. Edibles, I think, will probably remain at around that 5 to 10% mark, specifically because edibles are inexpensive and oftentimes they're an upsell.
But they, as we talked about, they provide like an entry role or a different role in the assortment, right? They're like one of those necessary things in the assortment for a whole bunch of great reasons, even though they total might not outstrip.
Yeah, it's a great point, Michael. So what point or what purpose they serve in a cannabis store, I think, will probably be one of the early differentiators of the focus that a cannabis store is putting on their products. Because right now we're all carrying flower. That's just what we're doing, right? As more and more edibles and more vapes come on the market and more innovative cannabis products come on the market, there will be an opportunity to start to differentiate ourselves from retailer from one another by what we carry. I could see a few years down the line there being a store almost wholly dedicated to edibles, right? It won't be us, but it's possible, certainly. I could see a store that specializes in vape. I could see a store that specializes in craft cannabis flower. Like there's certainly opportunities for that. It won't be for a good while. So how edibles, what purpose edibles serve will largely depend on the retailer in the future. Today, yeah, of course, they're that entry point for new cannabis consumers. But if my best guess is that the majority of edibles sold in our location for the foreseeable future will be upsells to existing cannabis consumers who want to try them or want to have that option. I don't know if it's going to be the initial flood of non-cannabis users, entering our retail stores to clean out the shelves of edibles to try their first cannabis experience. I don't know if that's necessarily what's going to happen.
Well, it's going to be fascinating to watch and learn together as great merchants like yourself practice the art and science of retailing. So that gets to be the fun part, right? Where you now can have a choice and you can now make a statement and curate and put forward a position. And so it's going to be an exciting industry to watch and watch how it develops. Andy, I want to thank you so much for joining me and having a great discussion around the state of retail cannabis in 2020 and beyond. I look forward to catching up a bit later in the year and seeing you.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks to Tanbir and Andy for being my guests on this episode. I want to take a pause and acknowledge the loss of 63 Canadians out of a total of 176 souls, victims of what in these early days appears to be a tragic shoot-down mistake in Iran. Reading through their personal biographies today as I tried to concentrate on the retail news for the newsletter and the podcast, I was struck by their individual and collective contributions as a community and cities across Canada. My thoughts are with their families and their community in these difficult and trying days. Well, now let's hit the highlights of the retail news in Canada and around the world for this week. The world does keep turning in the retail space, and let's start with, first of all, big stories, I guess, this week. and we've talked about it with Andy earlier on the podcast, was the release of 2.0 products. I was on CP24 in Toronto talking about it, representing retailers. Really, it was too early days in Ontario. They were already the products were already available in Saskatchewan. So the rollout will take time. I think by the end of this week, when you're listening to this podcast, some retailers in the province will have their supply. Early days, I think OCS has them online on the 16th, what assortment they're going to have available online. So enough said, basically. A good interview, great interview actually with Andy, gives you a good sense of the strategic importance of these product lines. And I'm sure we'll be talking about it in the weeks and months ahead in 2020. That's going to be a big story now that we've got the big story of open market, or the market reopening in Ontario, that clears the way for some concentration, so to speak, on product assortment, and the art and science of retailing. A great interview from Craig Patterson's Retail Insider with Larry Rosen, talking about the future of Harry Rosen chain. Larry talking about Harry's chain. A great news where he received the Order of Canada. I think Harry Rosen as well has received the Order of Canada. So a great family tradition, such a strong business. And so do check that article out from Retail Insider, Craig Patterson's Retail Insider. From CTV News, and there was much coverage of this, Hudson's Bay looks like it's reached their deal with the takeover, priced at $11 per share, up from what it was. I haven't done much reporting on this because it's been just back and forth from a financial perspective. But now that does look like that's closed out. So that's great news. It was a good article, by the way, in National Post. Jake had a great article in the National Post, and I had the opportunity to contribute that as myself, so to speak. I always contribute as myself, but not speaking on behalf of Retail Council, but with myself and speaking on behalf of myself and my own insights as a former executive there. Was there in 2099, 2000, launched HBC.com, and just as from my own perspective about what can and does need to happen in the months and years to follow for the Bay, now that they seem to have their financial arrangements all sorted out. A couple articles back to back here on the outlook for 2020, sluggish growth forecast. This from Business Vancouver, and then some other articles talking about the amount of leverage or debt that Canadians are carrying is starting to get worrisome. We've talked about that before, that it is on the minds of retailers as they think about 2020. So we'll be keeping a close eye on that. Late breaking news from Aritzia today. They produced some fantastic results, and as part of the call, talked about how they're going to do some expanded sizes. They're growing their size assortment. This article here from the Globe Mail talks about how they products go up to 10, sometimes 12, but they're looking at going up to size 18. And they're going to start that with their Babaton brand in the spring and summer. So good luck to them as they address that opportunity. Retail around the world, kind of an annual process here. Macy's closing 30 more stores. And, that's not, in some ways, it is an annual process. They did commit to having an annual review. They got a huge fleet. They still have 680 stores up and running, including some other specialty stores and different things. So it's a big fleet, and they're trimming it down by 30 stores, which is probably just more than necessary. In fact, when you look at the overall results this week between them, Kohl's, and JCPenney, they actually didn't do too bad versus expectation. I guess JCPenney was expected to fall short, and I think they fell 7.5% year over year. Decline from last year, which I guess everyone was kind of expecting. The one that seemed to surprise the market was Kohl's. I think Wall Street was expecting them to have a modest year-over-year gain, 1%, and they missed that mark. And so I think that surprised a lot of people. This article here from CNBC talks also about how their tie-up with Amazon was seen by a game changer, not by me. A game changer in that they took returns back from Amazon and had expanded that to drive traffic. But as this article says, Kohl's tie-up with Amazon was seen as a game changer, but sluggish holiday sales suggest it wasn't. I mean, it's not for lack of growth in the Amazon business, so I'm just not sure that's the right formula for Kohl's. We'll see how that sorts out for them. From a privacy perspective, this article here from Reuters talks about do not sell in for the U.S. retailers rush to comply with California privacy law. So there's a new privacy law, and it's long to get into details in the podcast. Maybe we'll get some expertise on that. California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA. You're going to be hearing a lot more about privacy this year in 2020, and I think this is just the start of it. The act doesn't take place or come into force until mid-year, but it lets shoppers opt out of allowing retailers and other companies to sell their data, and basically means that all retailers have to make that very clear that you can opt out of that and give people that clear choice. So I think that's going to have ramifications. I mean, basically, California often becomes the law of the land given its size of prominence in the market. So we'll be keeping a very close eye on that as time goes by. What else we got? Real men don't rent. So interesting article. We've been talking about how the rental market or the reuse market can be bigger than fast fashion. But interesting perspective here of the New York Times that men really don't want to participate in that. It's a fascinating look. Some up interviews, up close, so to speak, interviews with men about their fashion sense and why they're just not interested in renting. So that's kind of interesting. 10 retail trends to watch 2020. This from Retail Dive. Great summary article, so do check that one out. That's an important one to have a look through and understand at least that perspective. 20 new places to open shop in Saskatoon. Sorry, that means 20 places have just opened shop in Saskatoon. Nice summary article from the Star Phoenix, including our friends from Prairie Records featured in this overview. So lots going on actually in Saskatoon. So congratulations. 20 new stores, 20 new, mostly indie, actually exclusively indie. Prairie Records being probably the larger of the chain, so to speak. Speaking of cannabis, from the Ottawa Citizen article here on all the different stores that are looking to open up in the Ottawa area. One entrepreneur is looking to open up a Planet 13 size, that's a Vegas cannabis store, a huge Vegas cannabis store, sized property. And then you've got other folks, Mihi Cannabis, looking to open up stores. You've got some great comments here from Stefan Schenk, who we've had on the podcast. They hope to have 16 stores open in Ontario this spring, if all goes well. Good luck to them. They've been waiting for that for a long time, so good for them. So yeah, between Mihi, you're likely to see some Canna Cabana. You certainly see Superette expanding from their great store in Ottawa. So good days, better days certainly ahead in Ottawa. In Vancouver, legendary Chinatown cookware shop Ming Wu to close original location after 100 years in business. Wow. First opened its brick-and-mortar shop in Chinatown in 1917. This is from Straight.com. Another closing, and I put this one in, the Craft Ladies closing brick-and-mortar in Lancome, moving online. So it's a very clear articulation from this indie retailer that she sees people come in, they ask the product, they do all the research, and they go shop online. She says, well, why don't I just go be an online store? So I think it's a really clever thought out strategy when you go through the article about how she's going to do pop-ups and, this community-based retailer is just thinking about how to take her craft business online and not pay the rent. And so we wish her good luck. As we all know, it's easier said than done for retailers to attract people. She's been in the community a long time, so she'll have a nice established group of customers. But without physical presence, it can be challenging. But it sounds like she's got that figured out from different pop-ups and different presences. So we wish her all the best. And Victoria Running Business been named Store of the Year frontrunners by the Independent Canadian Running Retail Group, the Best Canadian Running Retail of the Year. And there's an association that represents running retailers. This is from Vic News. What else we got? From in digital, TNT launches e-grocery. Great article as well from Modern Retail on how FedEx and UPS battle against Amazon is changing online retail. And of course, changing the providers themselves. This in the light of Scott Galloway's post on FedEx and how he predicted they'd be bought out of business, so to speak, by the end of this year or early next. And he's pegged Walmart, or even the gangster move, as he often says, would be Shopify. So we'll keep an eye on that. But definitely changes happening as Amazon, disrupts that package delivery business in the U.S. and we'll see what happens here in Canada. Let's see what else. That's really kind of a wrap on the news. It was a busy week in one way. with lots of things happening in retail as the quarter results start to come out from the U.S. We start to see early numbers about how their holiday was. Seems like a lot of promotional dollars went in. It looks like they hit the top line, but I think the profitability took a hit from what I'm kind of sensing. I'll get a better sense of that next week. I'm off to NRF, and we'll be doing lots of episodes and get an update from the NRF show and NRF economists, actually, who always give a great update on holiday. Well, that's a wrap on this edition of The Voice of Retail. If you like this podcast, you can subscribe on Apple iTunes, your favorite podcast platform. Please rate and review, and be sure to recommend to a friend or colleague in the retail industry. I'm Michael LeBlanc, founder and president of Emmy LeBlanc and Company, Inc., and you can learn more about me on www.emmyleblanc.co or, of course, on LinkedIn. Until next time, have a great week.